In this next section here, I had been working on this previously for quite a while, and this whole process of this environment took a few weeks for me, working pretty steadily throughout the day. I was doing it on my winter break from work, and so I actually had quite a bit of time to sit and spend on it. And something kind of, I was talking to my coworkers and some good friends of mine, and we decided that lighting wise, it definitely was pretty boring. I totally agreed, and I've always, when I thought about what I wanted this to be, I wanted it to be, a temple that had been constructed in the place of a old, ruins. And, so you would see these pieces of temple that were, around the base. And then there was this new temple that was clean and vibrant, in a new location. So I wanted there to be little candles and tea lights. And I also wanted there to be some lanterns. And none of that would be, visible in that bright sunlight, the candles and torches, that is. So I decided to go for much more of a bluey, a blue kind of dusk. And so I went in and, I found a really beautiful HDRI that matched the time of day. You can see right there that immediately the feeling completely changes in this piece. And so my test renders are very low resolution. You can see I'm hiding the vegetation. I'm just trying to get the lighting worked out in this process. And so, once I'm happy with the HDRI and I've got the intensities all dialed in, then I'm moving on to the actual key light. The HDRI direction really has, a lot of intensity coming from that camera left side. And so I created this directional light to be my main sun, kind of key light as it is. And I gave it a very magenta hue. And so really, you can see in the renders, it's not extreme. And, even as pink as that light color is, it's really fairly subtle. And it's really just there to kind of accentuate the colors of that period of dusk. Where there's little hits of pink across the tops of the clouds that are still getting a teeny tiny bit of sunlight, but the rest of the world is really falling into this darkness before night. And, the whole world is encompassed in this very cool blue color. And on top of it, if you're ever in the city, you'll know this time of day very well, and all the skyscraper lights start turning on. The street lights turn on, but yet you can still see some color in the sky. That was really the vibe that I was going for. And so, once I was happy with that, I modeled I'm not the best modeler in the world, but I wanted to get in and make sure I had a little tea light. A lot of the Buddhist monks at these temples, they use these little dishes of oil, and they just have their little, these little tiny candles that are in these little dishes of oil. So I wanted to kind of have that be represented in this piece as well. So I'm just going in and getting the base model created for that. So I got all the tea lights made and placed, and I've got a V-Ray sphere light on each one, and I'm just duplicating these around right now. And you have to be careful when you're duplicating objects like this. Maya is not super smart, and you will run into an issue of a lot of duplicated names, which will mess up a lot of scripts if you're doing any of them. But you can see the render here, and it's feeling pretty nice. You can see there's a really beautiful contrast between that warm light from the candles and the cool, color from the V-Ray, light dome, from the dusk HDRI. And so the next thing here is going to be getting the torches set up. So you can see this was the very first torch that got placed, so I was trying to dial the intensity on one of them before I began the process of duplicating them all over the place. You can see I've got 4 torches on each pillar of the stairwell there. And, I started experimenting a little bit here, and I placed some lights all over that tower on the side. And I very quickly realized that it flattened out the entire thing. You can see in the test render right here that it's really pretty terrible. And so I went in and I think I pretty promptly deleted all of those. I was just totally not into it. So you can see there, I just got rid of them and placed another light or 2 around the base of the other stairs, just to give that feeling and cast a little bit of additional light. Once I'm happy with the torches here, the next step was getting the main light source in the scene. I guess actually I called the sun my key light, but it's really not. It's really more of almost a decorative light in this case. The main key light is really that lantern right there. So I brought in my model and got my point light placed for it. And, you can see the bridge model got updated now as well with some new pillars. And really went in, this section had a lot of changes. I really realized a lot of things about the scene. You can see the composition feels nicer with those smaller pillars. And I brought one of those torch lights forward and placed it in that lantern. I really wanted to get a lot of spill happening in the foreground, and so that lantern was a really good excuse to have that, that really nice warmth happening. Because I didn't want the foreground to get lost. It was a little busy, but it was almost kind of dark, and so I found my eye was always going to the background, and focusing on weird areas of the image, and so that idea of leading the viewer's eye is very important. The render is looking really nice, and so I'm kicking out my very first test render of this image to start comping this. I've got some images of candles and some flames to use, and I really want to just get in and start getting the very rough first pass of these candles placed in Nuke. Just kind of, you can see I'm rotoing out the candles, rotoing out the fire, and really getting in there and just simply placing them. I was feeling like I was ready to do it. And so just going in and one by one placing them on my Nuke trip so that I don't have to do it later. And so cool, you can really see how this all come together here. Just adding little glows here and there, and now that all my candles are placed, you can kind of see how that Nuke script looks there. It's just really, a couple transforms. So I mixed up the candles a little bit, rotated them around so they all felt a little bit different. And, I just started I always work like this where I start a Nuke pretty early, and I really like going in and just blocking in some color correction. Just really quick, you can see I'm adding this little bit of warmth across the ground, and I really liked that. And so this will really be kind of my workflow moving forward here. It'll be a lot of bouncing back and forth from Maya to Nuke, and I'll be doing pretty large scale test renders overnight or something. Just let a really nice quality render cook while I'm not, while I'm asleep or whatever. And I'll be able to go in and then see that in the morning and hook that into my comp and see where it's looking, or see how it's looking, rather. And so what we're doing here is really getting one of the last main assets set up, which is the bridge. The bridge was missing all of its textures and shaders, so I had to go in and kick out the normal maps from ZBrush that were sculpted, and just overall get this asset kind of sorted out. So this scene file that we're looking at is actually the bridge just by itself. I actually went in and exported it out completely from the lighting file just so I could really easily IPR render and work inside of a simpler scene. And what you're looking at here is the textures becoming in a pretty good spot, and the shaders are getting there. And the next step, what I found just in this simple scene, was that the angle of the bridge made it so that the color of the wood was fairly dark. So rather than bumping up the color of the wood and making it brighter, I did actually go in and place a light. And so you can see here I've got my spotlight, and you know I'm working in this small scene. I'm going to have to re-export my bridge, which is good because it needed to be an actual asset anyways. And so you can see there's the light coming in. So this spotlight is really just getting placed to help. The purpose behind it is that I have those 4 main torches around the base of the temple, and so they're able to emit some light onto that bridge. And so there you can see it's feeling pretty nice already. But one of the key things with this is, going in and making adjustments to your scene may come in the form of lighting rather than coming in the form of increased color. If you already have a pre-established light rig, then it may be the opposite, where you know the exact intensities of the lights, and the color on the shaders may need to get bumped up so that they fit into that light rig nicely. In this case, I did know that I liked that intensity of that wood texture because I've used it in the past, and I know that it looked nice in the bright sunlight, but because this scene is a little bit dark, it was a little hard to see the detail in the current lighting conditions, so I modified them. So the bridge file got saved out, and it's been brought back into this scene. I actually, just for cleanliness sake, I had a lot of leftover garbage in that other scene, and so I went in and I actually completely rebuilt my lighting file. Because I was doing so much work in the lighting file, modeling and texturing, importing assets, deleting assets, it really just got pretty heavy. That little frowny face right there is actually, this render that we're looking at is now up to about 3 hours a frame on my machine. Just so it can be said, the 3 hour frame render is really, even though that's heavy, in my opinion, for what's going on in the scene, it's actually pretty good with all that detail in the grass, and there's volumetric fog everywhere that's reflecting. We're doing pretty good render time-wise. So, got the new render in Nuke, and now we can move on from here. So in our comp file here, I've got my updated render, and the next step is getting the rest of the flames placed. So I just took that main torch, that candle or lantern image I've got there, and I just duplicated it, and I'm reconnecting them all into the Nuke script. And I'm later going to have an actual model on those pillars for this flame. But you can see there I'm just adjusting the little roto shape so that I can get some unique torch shapes. And then these guys all get duplicated around, and it will look like this. There we go. So you can see there's a bit of a glow added to them. We've also got some additional contrast going on now as well. So getting pretty close here. So up until this point, I've actually just been working on a single beauty pass in Nuke. I didn't have any of my render elements created yet. Didn't have any render layers created yet. And that's, can only get you so far. What I'm going in this section here is I'm creating all of my render elements, and I'm creating a lot of light select render elements. And I really love working with light selects. So going in and, establishing all of these definitely takes a lot of time. I'm going to edit it out of the video. You can kind of see what's going on here, that I'm creating lights, and I've got one for the diffuse light and then one for the specular, and I'm essentially going in and duplicating them all and then renaming them until I've got them established. So we'll skip ahead till I'm done with that. And so there you can see the master list there. So it's quite a bit of them. So the next step here, which again, just to kind of, because it's a little bit boring to watch, but I'm just going through and really, doing some final tweaks, moving some lights around. I'm also going to bring in 2 bridges and place them on either side, just so it feels like there's a little bit of a connection to the side of frame. And then I'm going to go in and create my main render layers. So just like in the environment fog discussion, I went in and I have the environment fog just set for my primary visibility to be off. So it's still reflecting and all of that, but I'm breaking this scene into some layers here. So you can see I've got a background layer that's just the sky and only the clouds. I'm rendering the fog completely separate from the actual geometry. And then I've got a beauty pass of the temple where the fog will be holding out light and it'll be visible in reflections, but it will not be in the actual render. Because I wanted it for reference, I actually did a 4th render layer as well that was the background sky with the actual fog rendered against it. I was a little worried that I wouldn't be able to get that right in compositing because I really liked the look of it in my render view. In the end, it turned out it was totally fine and it all added up correctly, which is all because V-Ray is so great at this stuff. But in the end, I didn't end up rendering that render layer except once for testing. So this was a pretty interesting little render that I was testing out. You can see in the rope that even though the atmosphere pass is perfectly clean, the beauty pass still has the specular from the rope in it. I actually never was able to figure that out. I'm assuming it's just a V-Ray bug. And so I moved on to trying to get some of the fog working a little bit nicer around the lights. You can see there's a little bit of a halo there, which I actually ended up just kind of embracing. Kind of looked like a little lens flare in the end. But, you can, once you've got the scenes kind of pulled apart like this in these render layers, it really makes the debugging process a little easier. You can go in and see things separated, and you can dial things individually, separate from the rest of your settings. For example, in this section, or in this render layer in the fog, I'm able to set overrides so that the subdivisions on the fog are much higher on this render layer. And so that's actually why I'm testing these little tiny squares, is over and over again I'm rendering the same spot and trying to figure out, a really nice way for the subdivs to look. If I rendered the fog with the beauty pass and I had the samples of the fog that high, I might have a big problem with that. It'd be much more difficult to have the subdivs that high in the beauty pass as well. Whereas the beauty pass with them a little lower, I can sample the reflections a little bit more and ended up getting a much better render time that way. The next step in this lighting setup here, what's been going on, I'm actually going in and I'm adjusting the grouping throughout the scene so that I can add these object IDs to groups. I had a lot of shaders, and so I felt for my first round of RGB mats that I would just have them across specific groups. And so I ended up dividing up the scene into 21 pretty nice groups just to get some simple breakup in the scene. And then later, as I need it, I can go in and add my material multi-mats for additional control. Cool, so here's our first test. You can see I chose to do a really small render with really terrible anti-aliasing, and I'm really just going in and checking all my light selects, and they're all working really well. And then just checking all of my RGB mats next. And if the RGB mats look funny, you can see I do have the LUT turned on, so they looked a little weird. That's totally fine. You can always just turn off the LUT and turn on sRGB if you really wanted to check it out. You can see also going from render layer to render layer that only certain render elements are turned on for each layer. That's to prevent just kicking out tons and tons of render elements per render layer that aren't really needed. And now the last step of this before I kick off my main batch render and really get this into comp is connecting a couple more extra texture render elements in the form of point world, point camera, ambient occlusion, V-Ray edges if I want to show a wireframe, which is nice for online portfolio kind of stuff, and also showing you guys. So After that, it's all about kicking out a batch render and getting this stuff over to Nuke. So you can see here, I'm going in and setting a folder for all these renders to go in, setting my version, and really just doing one more triple, quadruple check on my render settings. It's always a good idea to do a low-res test render and then kick out your batch render once you're completely ready.